Okay, I'm going to talk today about what we call food service hashgacha, which is to say it's hashgacha for restaurants and caterers, a local type of businesses, rather than like factory type things. I'm going to talk in like three parts. First, I'm going to be more general about what goes into making a good hashgacha, a good food service hashgacha. Then I'll talk a little bit about different roles that people play in that. And then the last part is going to be about particularly how that affects, how that plays itself out in a very small community. Okay, where there's a smaller Jewish community, and how giving that kind of hashgacha plays itself out in those kind of places. I have what pages worth of stuff to say, but I really don't want to just keep on talking. So feel free to pipe in and say what you want to say in the middle here. Okay, so let's start with the first part, just what it takes to make a good hashgacha. The beginnings of having a hashgacha are to have standards, okay? Which is to say is you have to know what your policies are. What do you believe in? Okay, what do we do when we want to give hashgacha? That way, everybody, that means it's the people who own the restaurants, the mashgiachim, the people in the office, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And in order to do that, you need people who understand food service, understand what kind of issues come up, and then they need to turn those questions back to people who are administrative type people and posek, rabbinic type people also. Okay, that is to say, think about how this CRC functions. Rabbi Reese is not the person who goes into restaurants and looks around and sees what goes on. But he needs people like that to come to him and say to him, these are the issues that we're facing, and how would you deal with that issue? How do you want us to deal with the issue? So this person explains it to him, goes through it, he understands enough about what's going on to be able to answer their question and set up. And then there are people who are like administrators, say, well, you said like this, but how are we going to play that out in practice in order to make some sense of that? And the guiding principle that people use is, we want everything to be done l'chatchila. It's not always possible, but that's our goal. A goal is that everything should be done l'chatchila. We don't want to do things that are b'diavad. Yeah, it could be mutter, I have 4 reasons and this and that. We want things to be done l'chatchila. So some of the things that need the most, so to speak, policies are what kind of hashgachas to take, what kind of things do or don't need hashgacha, how do we kasher? I was in a place recently and they told me, yeah, we kasher our sheet pans, we just do hagala onto them. Like they totally, you can't kasher sheet pans with hagala. Okay, so they didn't have rules about what they were supposed to do. Does it have to be any ben yoimai? How clean do things have to be like that when you want to kasher stuff? Also, another kind of standard is it's pretty accepted nowadays that a restaurant that serves food, particularly if it serves fleishigs, needs to have a Shomer Shabbos person there all the time. Exactly what that person is and what his role is he allowed to be the manager? Who does he get paid by? These are details how it's done, but it needs to have a person there all the time who's Shomer Shabbos keeping an eye on what's going on. But the thing that needs the most, like research and working on and this and that, is bedikas talayim. Okay, and that's because there's loads of vegetables out there. Things change from season to season, right? Now, I mean, you all heard about the tariffs coming, so that means is now instead of getting stuff from one country, we're going to get it from a different country. Things are going to switch around, and their climate and their pest control is all different than the next places. So you need to be in touch with what's going on. And there's only so much that I can do about that. But the guy in the next town over, he's doing stuff also, and people interact with each other to learn and keep up to date with what's going on. And then I have to turn all that knowledge into something that I train a Mashgiach to do. It doesn't help if I know anything if the Mashgiach who's in the restaurant doesn't have the rules or doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing. Okay, so what happens is there'll be a person who's responsible for that. Usually the person, so to speak, office person, the rabbinic type person, more rabbinic type person, he's in charge. He goes around, so like in our case, when Rabbi Langer actually sets the rules and the policies, but when Rabbi Katz will walk into a restaurant and he'll see a Mashgiach checking vegetables, so I thought I was walking into this restaurant for just a quick 15-minute walkthrough, but I see the Mashgiach really needs help. He goes sit there for an hour and work with the guy. When you check that thing, this is how you do it. Or we used to do it this way. We now have a better way of doing it and work with the person hands-on to be able to make sure that it works. Okay. Other things having to do with standards are different communities have all kinds of rules about. Do they want things to be Chol Yisroel, Pas Yisroel, Yashan, all kinds of things like that? Do we make it Bishul Yisroel, First Friday, all kinds of things like that? Okay, and last about policies is that places that are confident in what they do are happy to tell people and share with them why they do it. Okay, if somebody calls us up and says we just dealt with this is a factory type situation. They want to. There's a question about if it needs Bishul Yisroel and how to do it. And what we decided was we're going to do X. This is what we're going to do. But when you call me up and you tell me how do you do it, I'll tell you to. You don't have to agree with us. You could disagree with us. You could not accept our food if you don't like that because of that. But if I believe in what I'm doing, I'm happy to tell you about it. I could defend what I'm doing. You don't agree with how I did it, that's fine. Your choice. You don't have to eat it. You don't have to agree with us. But I'm not hiding and saying, no, this is how we do it. Believe me, and everything is perfectly fine. I'm open to telling you what I do because I'm confident that I actually know what I'm talking about. Okay, well, at least my opinion has legitimacy to it. Okay, let's move to another section of what goes on in the Hashgachah, and that is the oversight.
Just back to the Kashrus policies for a second. I'm curious, I guess, how the CRC, but like how one in general could think about this question about choosing the right balance between chumras and kulas, and not being too onerous on business establishments, but also maintaining very high standards. Like, how do you choose when it's a legitimate machlok as a poskim, and we're going to go one way on that?
Right. So that's a role of it's sort of a mix, but really it's the role of the posik for the organization. In Chicago, we have a local, Rabbi Reese is our posik. He answers our shilas. In some communities, they don't have the local person. They turn to someone bigger or someone outside of the community who's their person they turn to. That person gives them the, so to speak, the raw halacha. Sometimes that person understands practicality also of what's going to work. But we have an administrative person who looks and says this, well, Rabbi, you told me we have to do X. Okay. Right now there's a discussion going on with Rabbi Reese about music being played in restaurants. Okay, and Rabbi Reese says, this is what I think is the din. This is mutter and this is asr. Okay, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And Rabbi Fishbein says to him, okay, well, what you're saying, we're not arguing on the halacha part of it, but on the practicality of it, this is workable or this is not workable. This does well for our community, doesn't well do for our community, and Rabbi Reese can sort of absorb that and decide what to do. So it's sort of a mix of that things. I mean, we'll talk later about small communities which have more of a challenge for that. But in any community, it doesn't make a difference where you are. Every place has issues. They have to decide what can we do and how much can we push and how much is realistic. Okay. So in order to have oversight, how do you set up the oversight that makes Hashgachah? Hashgachah means we keep an eye on you and see what you're doing to make sure things are done correctly. So the biggest, so to speak, part is a vad. There's some kind of a rabbinic organization that sits around higher up, so to speak, who's looking out for what has to be done. They hire people. They're the checks and balances to make sure things work the way they're supposed to. And they have to be, what can I say? They have to be organized. Okay, they have to have their life together. Okay, we no longer do things on the back of a napkin, and in someone's I remember, and she once told me, and we think like this. That doesn't fly. They have to talk to each other. They have to meet with each other. Okay, Avad, who says yes, we have meetings. Sure, we have meetings. Our last one was in 2012. That was the last time we sat down. So we need to. It doesn't have to be formal. At other places we dealt with, nothing happens live because they just do it through with WhatsApp. It doesn't make them, as long as they're talking to each other, they're connected to what's going on. And when things go wrong, they're willing to admit they made a mistake also. And the in this regard, when we talk about VAD type things, the general rule we say is communal, so to speak, non-profit Hashgachah is better than a private, personal, I'm the rabbi, who Hadayan, who's Ha'ed, he does everything. It's better when it's more communal, has less personal gain to it, and could be more objective. Then we have people who are the not the Mashgiach in the restaurant, what we call a rabbinic coordinator. It's a person who's oversight on it. He's Yotzim Nichnas, he goes into the places, he keeps an eye on things that goes on. And then we have a Mashgiach who's day-to-day standing in the restaurant. He's the guy in the back of the pizza shop, keeping an eye that things are the way they're supposed to be. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about what we want, what the Mashgiach does. What is this job, his actual job? We'll get to that in a minute. What the actual job the Mashgiach has is, but what we're looking for to be Mashgiach, the difference often between a good Hashgachah and not has to do with the quality of Mashgiachim you get. Again, not the rabbinic people who sit in offices with ties on. I'm talking about the guy who's in the actual restaurant himself. We need someone who has Yer Shemayim. So he's conscientious, and he's knowledgeable, and he knows what he's doing. Okay, that's what we're looking for, and it's a big challenge. In many communities, there are very few people who are really qualified. Well, let me say it the other way around. People who are qualified who are willing to do the job for what they're paying them. Okay, so that all rolls into this. Is like, how do we find someone? If I think that you are the most qualified person, but you don't want to work in a restaurant, you don't want to work for what the pay they're giving to you. How do we find the right people? It's a big challenge for Hashgachos to find someone to do that job, and that's why they tend to be very, we'll use a nice word, they're flexible about who they're willing to take. But unfortunately, you walk in, again, I walked into a place, this was a more industrial type place. I walked in and it was hopeless. I mean, there was a Mashgiach there all the time. It was a sort of a food service kind of place. It was he was hopeless. He wasn't doing anything. He was nobody, literally, he was no, you think at least he's there? No, he was like way in the back doing something totally not related to Kashrus. There was like totally not, you couldn't talk to the person. There was like no, I was like, that's not a Mashgiach. He's like totally hopeless. There was nobody. He was totally incompetent. There wasn't a judgment. You don't know the person. It doesn't make a difference. When I told this to the rabbis, they said, "Yeah, we know." I said, "Okay, well, what are you doing?" I'll be like, I said, "Yeah, we know." But it's some communities, depending on what's going on, they find retirees who are willing to do it. They can be very responsible and very capable. They're not really needing out there for the money. They want to keep themselves busy. They're responsible people. And so that works in some places. But whatever it is, it's a challenge to find the right people who are willing to take the job, who could actually do what we want them to do. Okay, that Mashgiach then reports back to the people in the office, who eventually report back to the Vad, so to speak. It's a bunch of steps away. Okay, so that's the overall. I gave you.
When you say report, does that mean every day I send a report of what happened today? I check lettuce, or is this?
It depends. That's for the Mashgiach to do that was probably a little too much for him to do that. But what it is let's say if you're the Mashgiach in the restaurant, so you do your thing. You do your thing. You probably don't report daily to anybody. But there's a Yotzev Nichnas. There's a person who comes in. Let's say he comes in once a week into your place. When he comes in, you give him a little update of what's been going on. We started this, we stopped this thing, we're getting more of this, we're having problems with our strawberries. You tell him what's been going on. That person, every time he comes in, needs to make a report. He needs to keep record of what's going on, that something's happening. That someone could look back at a bigger picture and see what's happening in this place, But the guy who's there every day probably is not reporting every minute what's going on. That's he'll go crazy. It doesn't serve anybody any benefit. Okay, so now let's talk about two different roles in Hashgachah. One is the Mashgiach. What does the Mashgiach in the restaurant do? And then we'll talk about what the rabbi does. Okay, community rabbi. Okay. The Mashgiach, in my mind, has three main jobs, and I'll tell you some little jobs that he has also. Three main jobs that he has. The first is taking care of ingredients. Okay? It's the most obvious thing that to be kosher, you have to have kosher ingredients. That's the most obvious part of kashrus, right? There are other things, we know that, like hafrashas challah. But there's like other things that go on, but the most obvious thing is ingredients have to be kosher. So that means he watches. Restaurants are very different than factories. In factories, they get the same stuff all the time, and they get it in huge quantities, and that's not like a restaurant's like. Restaurants' menus change all the time, their suppliers change all the time. They run out of something, they send the guy down the block to buy some, right? It's a different mentality. So the Mashgiach's got to keep an eye on everything that comes into the place. He has to watch what they're cooking. Like, how are you cooking with that thing that I didn't even see showed up at the door, right? So where did that come from? He's not just watching the storeroom. He's out in the front to see what they're cooking with. Okay, just keep an eye on things. Again, another place we have to. They said everything here. The Mashgiach checks everything is kosher. All the ingredients are kosher. And it was a nursing home type facility. Okay, everything comes in kosher. It's true, but the instant potatoes that they used were milchiks. But they served them with fleishig meals. Okay, so it doesn't help you that it was kosher. You looked at there was a hashgachah on it, but they were serving those instant potatoes that were milchigs at fleishig meals. Okay, so he wasn't paying attention from that side. But so if he walks outside, he sees they're using potatoes. It's like, where did those come from? Well, where did this ingredient come from? So he's keeping an eye on ingredient wise. Usually, ingredients that you use in food service come with a reputable hashgachah. That's pretty typical. With the hashgachahs that you're all familiar with. But there are some things that he'll be told don't need hashgachah at all. And then there are things that have hashgachas that he never heard of. Like he sees this funny logo, he doesn't know what it is. They have to have someone to turn to say that's his people in the office. That's his Yosef Nechna, that's his rabbi, and say to them, tell me, is this a good hashgacha or not a good hashgacha? Okay, you can try the new CRC app that lets you scan logos, right? Really, really fancy feature. Scan logos, or to have someone to turn and say, what do I do with this logo? Or does this need hashgacha altogether? Okay, so that's ingredients. Go ahead.
Let's say there's like a logo that's not on the CRC app, and a restaurant wants to use it because it's a specialty product that comes from the middle of nowhere, right? Peru.
Yes.
I know Trader Joe's has a Hashgachah from Peru.
Yes.
So would the CRC ever allow them to use that product in the restaurant?
So, okay, sometimes there are hashgachas that are not on the app that are perfectly fine also. Okay, some that we know, we have more information in our office than it shows on the app. So there are hashgachas that are okay. And then there are products that, for this hashgacha, we would only approve the product if we know more about it. We'll call the Rav Mashgiach, and it's a person who at least we know we could trust if we talk to him and say to him, tell me about that product. And after understanding what's going on, or talking to the Mashgiach, or maybe even sending somebody there, we might approve that specific item. So this hashgacha, we might tell you, no, it's not recommended. Oh, but for that item on that hashgacha, it's okay. You could use that. And then there's a whole another group which is things that we say don't need hashgacha altogether. So you say, I want to use flour and it has a really big hashgacha. We'll say to you, it's okay. The flour doesn't need hashgacha altogether. So you could use it regardless of whether there's hashgacha or not. You know, so
how's this? Just curious from a consumer standpoint. So let's say I have a family member who just told me they talked to Rabbi Yaakov Learfeld. I don't know who that is. They said they know who he is. And he said that he's visited the bird's eye plant and they wash the vegetables very well. And he thinks that you can eat the cauliflower and the broccoli. So I'm a consumer. I don't know this person. And I don't know is he an expert in Kashrus if he knows about checking vegetables. So if I heard that information, what would I do with that?
So you have to turn to someone who knows Kashrus. So in your case, you live here. You call up the CRC and say to them, hi, this is what I heard. What do you know? Is that reputable or is that not reputable? You have to turn to someone who like you said over the name of somebody this thing. Does that person himself know anything? The person who told me maybe doesn't know anything either. You know, someone told me yesterday, Rabbi X said the following. Someone said publicly that Rabbi X, who is no longer living, said the following thing. I said to him, who told you that? He said, 4 people told that to me, that rabbi said that thing. I said, I know one of them. I called one of the guys, says, I never said that. It's not true. Okay, so that's, he didn't even say it. But then the person you said is, the guy actually said it, but he doesn't know what he's talking. He maybe doesn't know, maybe knows, maybe doesn't know. So you have to turn to someone who knows to find the answer to that. Just like if I told you that Bob told me that this is a kosher mezuzah. You say, well, what does Bob know whether it's a kosher mezuzah or not? So we have to find out. I have no idea whether he knows it. He knows. Okay, so our first thing we had.
In general, is there a way for someone who doesn't work in Kashrus to get a working facility of some of this information, or do you really think it just has to go through a centralized organization to get enough expertise?
It's not like two things. First of all, it's not like it's an on-off switch. Yes, I know everything. No, I know nothing. Right? There's a lot of gray in between. So the more experience you have, or the more time you spend with it, the more you'll know. It's not yes or no. It's more you'll know. So Rabbi Brand said, he says, I know that it needs more expertise to know about checking vegetables. So that I know I need to ask someone about that. But other things don't need as much, and it could be easier to know that. Okay. And the second thing is that it isn't like there's a flash drive that I could plug into your ear that now you'll know everything, right? So it takes time for you to learn that information. So the more you're involved, we're going to talk about rabbis in a second. The more you're involved is the more you'll know. That's what we're saying. Okay.
No, I'm right. I know the debate. It's I Shul Rabbanim have opinions about things. Like this sometimes I hear it all the time. This Rav thinks that this Rav Mashgiach is fine for this kind of restaurant, not that kind of restaurant. And, this is a Rav who's perfectly comfortable with those kashrus, and I don't know what they know about industrial things.
Right.
But maybe I'm getting the sense from you that I should take those kinds of claims with a grain of salt if you're not really.
But you have to know if that person does he really know? Again, if you voice an opinion about, I don't know, how to repair my car, so wouldn't I want to know, do you know anything about repairing cars? Do you know anything about cars? Or you go, well, I like to drive them. Well, that doesn't mean anything. But do you know anything about repairing? So if you say, that I know anything about whether this ketchup is kosher l'pesach or not, do you know anything about making ketchup? What do you know what the question is or what's going on? Okay, let's move on. So the first jar the Mashgiach has is ingredients. That's the most basic thing that a Mashgiach does. Okay. The next important jar the Mashgiach does is take care of Bishul Yisroel. That's because food that's not edible raw and that would be served at a more elegant event needs to have a yid participate in the cooking. Okay, so it's called Bishul Yisroel. Everybody, it's required, no matter what, it's required. Now, there are lots of foods that don't need Bishul Yisroel. Like, if you want to heat up a pot of water, we want to make coffee, it doesn't need to be Bishul Yisroel. Okay, but in most food service locations, they have a very simple rule, and that is no cooking, no turning on fires happens except by the Mashgiach, except by the Shomer Shabbos. And that's because we don't need Jose to be figuring out, this is Eilu Shulchan Aruch, it's not Eilu Shulchan Aruch. Okay, that we don't want him sitting and declaring each time, but rather the general rule is everything that has to do with turning on heat, fires, cooking, and things like that has to have a yid participating in it. Okay, that's the simple way he takes care.
Would it be permitted to turn the pilot light constantly on an industrial oven and all they do?
So now you're into a detail. Yes, so it happens to be most hold that it's 100% fine. Some Hashgachos only use it as a backup. Okay, they want the yid to turn on every fire, but they also have the pilots lit by him to make sure, in case something goes wrong, we have a backup that we know is always Bishul Yisroel. There are different ways that people do it. Okay, but that's if we say is that the pilots are lit and we keep an eye on those pilots, then that's the control.
So that would be fine. Then Jose can.
Right, but we wouldn't let him light pilots. What I'm saying is we don't differentiate between this you can cook. You want to hit string beans, you could do it. You want to cook potatoes, you can't do it. That doesn't work. Okay, that's realistic. That's not realistic. We say everything has to be if the control is lighting the pilots, then always pilots have to be. Okay, now. The restaurant kitchens are very busy. Okay, there's a lot going on in a kitchen. And for that reason, it's not enough just to light the fire in the morning, turn everything on in the morning, and then say everything's going to be fine. Okay, fires go out all the time. Things happen. People turn off fires. They get blown out. All kinds of things happen. So part of Bishul Yisroel is not just saying I light the fires. Is I keep an eye on things to make sure that fire stays lit. I'm available when you need me to relight it. Okay, that something goes on in order to make sure that the Bishul Yisroel is maintained. Okay? And the most challenging cases are when a place has a microwave, because microwaves don't stay on; they need to be put on each time you use it. Or if they have a rice cooker, okay, a rice cooker cooks rice, but when you finish, it turns off. So it needs a yid to light it, keeping an eye on it when they're cooking rice, and knowing the flow of what's going on to turn it on. And a convection oven. Okay, and a convection oven is, you've seen them like in a yeshiva kitchen or in a catered kitchen. It's the one that the door is open sideways. They pull open like that. And those, it's called convection because there's a fan inside of it that circulates the air. Okay, so it cooks through a method called convection. And what happens is when you open the door, the hot air is going to blow in your face. So because there's fans on. So they all have a built-in safety feature that when you open the door, the fan goes off. And that's a safety feature to keep the guy who opens the door getting the hot air blown in his face. And usually the fire goes off also, which means is that if the door stays open for long enough, you lose your Bishul Yisroel. I turned on the oven at 8 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, someone opened the door, didn't close it again until 9:15. By that time, the oven was cold because there's no fire inside of it. Again, in your home oven, if you open the door, it'll stay warm anyhow because the fire will keep coming back on. So, and that's also the Mashgiach have to keep an eye on. I'm just giving you an example of things that the more difficult things for the Mashgiach to keep an eye on to make sure they stay Bishul Yisroel. Okay, and then the third of the three things that the Mashgiach, his main jobs are vegetables. Okay, vegetables that includes like herbs and berries and things like that. All have things that anything that potentially has bugs in it is something the Mashgiach has to keep an eye on. He has to check it. He's going to have to wash it or check it or have the employees wash it and he checks it afterwards. Whatever he does, some system to make sure that there are no bugs in them. And depending on what kind of restaurant it is and how busy they are, he could spend lots of time on it. Okay, that might take him hours a day to check their vegetables. Like imagine if it's a place that serves lots of salads. Okay, then he has lots of vegetables that he has to check. So not only does he have to spend a lot of time on that, he's got to make sure he's able to do all the rest of his jobs also. If he spends all day at the lettuce, he's not keeping an eye on everything else. And he has to watch that they're not using stuff he didn't check. It doesn't help for me to check 2 bags of lettuce when I'm not looking, they're just pulling in other bags from the other side that I didn't look at all. Okay, so all that's part of his job in keeping an eye on the vegetables and things like that. Okay, some other little things that the Mashgiach does is he does Hashgachah. He keeps milk, meat and fish separate from each other. Tfilas kalim. He puts simanim on things going out. So those are all different kinds of things that a Mashgiach does in the restaurant. Okay.
What do you mean simanim on things going out? Like
deliveries. On deliveries, if you're getting delivery, I'll mention it. Well, I wasn't going to talk about this, but when you get delivery, it needs a simon on it. It needs a simon on it in order to make sure that it's secure, that the person delivering doesn't switch it. Okay? It's become, I'll just mention, it's become an issue nowadays, more of an issue nowadays, because it used to be when we send out deliveries, the store sent out the delivery. If our delivery person wasn't Shem Shabbos, we knew we had to put a simon on it. If someone came and picked up an order, I don't put a simon on it. You came and bought yourself a sandwich, I give it to you, just hand it to you. Now there's Uber Eats, which is to say is someone's coming and picking up a delivery, but it's not the customer. The guy who's picking it up is not the customer who's going to eat the sandwich. So if the Shem Shabbos, if you walk in and ask for a sandwich, I just hand it to you. I don't have to give you a simon on it. If you keep kosher, you don't keep kosher, I don't care. Here's your sandwich. Do what you want with it. But if I give it to the driver who's going to DoorDash, who's picking up my sandwich and bringing it to the person, he's not Shem Shabbos. So, but I wasn't sealing it because I was just handing it to the customer. Okay, so it's become more complicated. Either people request on part of the DoorDash order is, and please seal it for going out. And some places, Hashgachos have said is, you have to seal everything. It makes no difference. If the guy will ask for a French fries, he says, can I have French fries? We give you French fries, we seal it, hand it to you. You know, everything gets sealed up because there's too many mistakes happen when people have a delivery they weren't supposed to. Okay.
Does the Mashgiach need to put the table?
No, he has to make sure that it happens.
Okay, yeah.
Anybody can put the table on as long as someone's making sure that there are simanim on things going out. It's just, he's just keeping an eye on things, like, you know. Okay.
When it comes to like checking vegetables, checking lettuce, I'm assuming the Mashgiach isn't doing all of it on his own. Like you said, like he can't like spend all day.
So it depends. It depends on how much time he has and how busy they are, etc. Some places he actually does the work himself, and some places let's say Rabbi Langer says for this thing you have to wash it in the following way and then check in this way. The washing part might be done by the employees, and then say to the rabbi, "Okay, Rabbi, we're ready. We did our first step, and now you do your step." That's something that's happened. Or sometimes they say he does the whole thing, depending on what the time and how complicated it is, or whatever. Yeah, and depends on what's going on. Okay, so now, but what I haven't mentioned to you is that the Mashgiach, I don't know how you say this, sort of in the background is the control. Okay, is that if the Mashgiach walks out the door at 8:00 at night, and the owner can come whenever he wants to, then we didn't gain anything from the Mashgiach. I don't think we gained anything, but we lost. We have the opportunity for something to happen when he's not there. Okay, so that means is the control of, or if we send the Mashgiach out on deliveries, okay, and we leave the store open for an hour with him not there, we don't have any control of what's happening. So Mashgiach made sure the ingredients were kosher, but then they brought in a piece of meat afterwards that was not kosher. Okay, so control means usually the owner doesn't have the keys to the place. When the Mashgiach leaves at night, the doors are locked and the owner has no control, can't get in anymore. Okay, that's usually what it means. Okay, if you Shem Shabbos, some places will let it, they won't let it, but it means that there's got to be oversight. I don't mean oversight, control that when the Mashiach's not there, nothing's happening. Okay, let me move now to the other role that there is, which is the community rabbi. I'm not talking about the people, not like Rabbi Eisenbach. I'm not talking about the people who work on Hashgachah. I'm talking about the community rabbi, and that is like this. When you think of Hashgachah, you usually think about the Mashgiach, like I've been talking about the Mashgiach, the office people, or the guys who come in and out and this and that, but there's a community rabbi. And the truth is, the community rabbi is the one who's really responsible for the Kashrus. Okay? You're the rabbi of the community, you're responsible for the Kashrus and the Eruv and the Mikvah. Everything that's going on in the community is your responsibility. Well, I'm too busy. I have too much going on in my life, and therefore I hand it over to someone and says, you please take care of the Kashrus. Really, it's my responsibility. I'm responsible for everything going on in town. But I can't do everything. So I say, okay, Beryl, please, you be the one to take care of the Kashrus. Okay? So the rabbi has to have the mindset of not they do Kashrus, is I'm responsible for Kashrus. Chaim is the one who helps me in doing that job. Chaim's a professional. Chaim's got all kinds of experience. I should be the one with all that information and all that knowledge and all that experience, but I can only do so much, and therefore I ask him to do it for me. Okay? Sometimes in a small community, the rabbi is the Kashrus person. Okay? He becomes the person in Kashrus. That's true. But I'm talking about a more typical situation where the rabbi is the rabbi of the community and someone else takes care of the Kashrus things. So hiring this administrative person is not the end of his job. First of all, he's got to keep an eye on him. Okay, is the administrator doing his job that he's supposed to be? Okay, sometimes the guy is not up to what he's supposed to be. So I can't watch you every minute, but overall, giving a feel for whether the person is doing his job. My job as the rabbi, if the community rabbi is, I set the policies. Okay, again, they give me all the information, but in the end, we're setting the policies. We're making sure that the community and the other rabbis in town all support the VAD. I don't want to use PR, but I'm the one who walks around the community and says, this is what the VAD does, this is why it's worthwhile. I say it to the people in the shul, and I say it to the people, other rabbis in the community, to explain to them what's going on. And at times, it means creating a lay board. A lay board means a non-rabbinic board who deals with managerial issues, with financial issues, things like that, that's what their expertise is. They're much better at that than I am. Okay, and I say to the accountant, the lawyer, and the guy, the business person in town who know how to run a business, who understand these things, say to them, will you take that role in the VAD and help us out in doing those kind of things that are not rabbinic? That's not, I don't know anything about that. You're good at that, and you could do that. So to do that, to do all these things I just told you that the rabbi is supposed to do, he has to stay engaged. Okay, he can't hand it off to the person and say to him, "You're in charge. You do it." The rabbi's got to show up at places. Okay, he has to go to the actual restaurants and walk around and see what goes on in the places. He has to talk to the administrator, talk to the mashgiachim, and I know almost every place has this. For sure, the CRC does. Any new hashgachah needs to pass by the rabbis of the community. We have our board type people who has to pass by, and any hashgachah that's being dropped. Okay, if the restaurant X did something wrong, or we don't like them, or whatever reason they're being stopped with stopping hashgachah, that has to pass by the rabbi. It's too important for him to know what's going on. Okay, yes.
The CRC is that a constitution?
Yes, correct. So in the CRC, again, if we were living in Nowheresville, USA, there would be two rabbis in town, and the two of them are the board. They are it. In Chicago, there's Baruch Hashem, dozens of rabbis in town, so we can't have everybody voting in on that. That's not so realistic. So the Kashrus Commission is our way of saying, here are this group of people, and they're the ones who we designated as our representative of the other rabbis in town to take that responsibility. But really, it's every rabbi's responsibility, really. So like Rabbi Matenki from here, and he sits on the Kashrus Commission because he's like, I'm a rabbi in the community, I should be involved. It's really my responsibility. Okay, maybe he has nothing to do with the Eruv. Well, actually, he does. He has lots to do with the Eruv. Maybe he doesn't do with the mikvah because that he's. I can even only be that much involved so much, but I should be involved. It's his responsibility. You know? Okay, now I'm going to move on to the third part. Do you have any questions on said so far?
On the administrative piece, you mentioned financial issues, and I was thinking just about the general arrangement. So in a typical situation, and maybe there are exceptions. There are lots of parties. There's a Mashgiach and a Rav and a restaurant, and who's contracting with who's hiring who, how does money move around in that operation? Okay, so maybe I should have explained that better. The administrative person is the one who deals with financial issues, contract. I don't mean he actually writes a contract, but he's the one whose responsibility to deal with people on that level. Is you want Hashgachah? Well, we're going to send Rabbi Eisenbach to see if this restaurant can be certified. How would we set it up? What would be the parameters for doing that? When he comes back to Rabbi Fishbane, who's the administrator, he says, okay, now we had to set up a contract. He sits down with the people to say, let's work on the terms from a contractual side, from the financial side, that kind of stuff. So that's an administrator. Again, in the smaller community, it's the same guy wearing all these hats. But I'm talking when the roles are separated, there's an administrative person who's doing that part of it. He's the one who deals with owners, not from he may deal with Kashrus issues, but it's from the side of I'm coming as an administrator rather than the hands-on kind of person. And then the office people like Rabbi Eisenbach or Rabbi Katz, who's the Yotzev Nechnas, he goes in and out of places, they get paid by the Hashgachah. The Hashgachah is paying them for what their services. Mashgiachim, the best setup is that a Mashgiach gets paid by the Hashgachah also. It's not so common. Okay, it's much more common that the Mashgiach gets paid by the local facility. They're the ones who pay him. He's like their employee. That's not so great from a Kashrus perspective, because if I pay your salary, you listen to me. If the restaurant owner pays your salary, then you listen to him. So the best setup, and also from a legal perspective, it's better if the Hashgachah would pay him than if the restaurant would pay him. But it has tax implications depending on who pays you, who pays your FICA taxes. It has kinds of implications of who pays. But really the best setup, everybody agrees that the best setup would be as if the Hashgachah would pay that person. So we take to the restaurant, you need to pay us $1 a week for a Mashgiach, and then we give the $1 to the Mashgiach.
In most cases, that's not what happens. In most cases, they just say they might negotiate his terms. You have to pay him $1 an hour in order to be the Mashgiach, but usually the restaurant pays straight. Okay, it's not great. It's admittedly not great because again, you give my check at the end of the week. I listen to you. That's okay. Now let's move on to small community hashgachah. Okay, everything that I told you until now applies equally, whether it's a big hashgachah or a small hashgachah. You're in a big community with dozens of restaurants and lots of from people, or you're in a place that has nothing at all. There's barely a minion in the place. It makes no difference. Okay, in theory, everything should be the same. Okay, but in practice, it's not, and that's because the hashgachah's ability to make rules, enforce rules, and carry things out comes from communal pressure, which is to say, it's like this. The reason why a restaurant wants to be kosher is some people, out of the goodness of their heart, because they believe in kosher, they eat kosher, they want people to have kosher food. But by and large, it's because that's what the customers want. I want to serve these people food. Those people only come if they're kosher. So the more people there are that are demanding kosher food, the more people are willing to pay a little more because you have to have a mashgiach, because you have to have only kosher meat. That's the more there is of that, is the more I'm willing to become kosher. Okay, so I'm responding to my customers. Basically, that's what I'm doing. I'm serving this food because that's what I think people want. Okay, well, the hashgachah's ability to then enforce rules comes from the more people there are who want kosher, is the more I'm able to enforce rules. It says, in order to be kosher, you have to do this. Okay, again, I can be more particular if you feel more obligated to follow those rules. Okay, so in a small community, they're at a huge disadvantage from that side. Okay, when I mean small Shomer Shabbos community, people who keep kosher. There's less people who will patronize the store only if it's kosher. So they say to the store, you have to have kosher cheese. He says, why would I pay extra for kosher cheese instead of treif cheese? Nobody wants that. Okay, well, if they're not, there's 3 people a week coming who want kosher pizza, I'm not going to get kosher cheese. Okay, so then my ability to tell him you have to have a mashgiach there is much weaker when he has less people coming to that. Okay, and that plays out in a bunch of ways, which is what I'm going to talk about now. A bunch of different ways that plays out when we're in a small community. Okay, so the first is, maybe the most obvious, is that if we have a smaller from community, then we're going to have less kosher stores. We have fewer locations of places that are kosher. In Chicago, we have, 20, 30 restaurants. I don't know how many there are because there's that many people. Okay, in a small community, there's going to be fewer places, if any, that are willing to be exclusively for kosher people. What I mean is, no one stops people from walking into Ken's who are not kosher and buying a sandwich. No one stops them from it. But that's not who his market is. His market is people who keep kosher. That's who he is. He doesn't stop people from coming in. He's happy to have those customers, but so how many places will there be in a very small community that will be basically there just to serve the from community? So I'm going to tell you 3 workarounds that people do. Okay, we don't have enough community to afford. And I'm going to show you 3 workarounds people do, each one of them with its own weakness. The first is, we have a home business. Okay, we have a Shomer Shabbos person. Maybe it's the Rebbe in town. Maybe it's just some nice person who has a place, who makes challahs at home. They make takeout food. They make kugels, they make cookies, whatever they make in their house, and they offer it for sale. Okay, we're offering sale. I make kosher food, so I don't have to have a whole restaurant that's kosher, but I can work out of my house and I make kosher food. Okay, we have problems. Do we trust somebody who's out there making a profit? Okay, does Eid Achanim Bishul apply if I would eat in your house? But what happens if you run a business? Maybe that takes away from your neman or something. Maybe how would anybody keep an eye on what someone's doing in their house when, by its very nature, a house is not a place that we could just walk into? Okay, if I walk into Sarah's tent, when you're open, you can just walk in and see what's going on. It's a big, wide open place. But I can't come into your house at 11 o'clock at night when you're in your pajamas cooking. Okay, I can't do that. I can't just show up when I want to and just walk around, sort of out of my control of someone actually seeing what's going on. Also, when you deal with people who are just working on their own home businesses, do they know the dinim that they have to apply? What I mean, I'll tell you a common question. A common thing that people miss is, do you have to be mafresh challah from a blila raka? Okay, so they say, of course not. My mother never did that. My mother made bli l'raka. She made pancakes and sponge cakes. She never was mafresh challah. I know you don't have to mafresh challah. She was mafresh challah from a challah and her cookies, but never from that. Of course not, because in a bli l'raka, you have to have a lot of flour. And who makes enough pancakes at a time to be mafresh challah? But when you're running something commercially, all of a sudden you have to be. Of course you have to be mafresh challah from bli l'raka. They don't know that because they just don't know. They don't know. Do scallions need to be checked for vegetables, checked for bugs? How about strawberries and lettuce? I don't know. They just don't know. They may not. The person working at home may just not have the information that they need to do hashgachah. So that's a weakness in having home hashgachah. Again, it's what some places will do it. That's what all that there is in town. Okay. Another is they use the shul kitchen. Okay, and that is there's a person who we can't afford again to have a kosher restaurant, but he'll have Thursday night pizza made out of the shul kitchen. Or every day of the week he has something. A couple hours a day, you order him, you tell him what you want, and he makes it out of the shul kitchen. It's a little bit better because we have a shul kitchen, but it assumes, not for today's discussion, that there's control over the shul kitchen. The rabbi actually has control over the shul kitchen, which is its own issue of how much control does the rabbi have over the kitchen to make sure that it actually stays kosher. And another workaround people use is there'll be a caterer who's really a non-kosher caterer. Okay, so his business is, 5 days a week he's serving anything and everything all around town. But every once in a while when people need kosher food, he has a couple of pots on the side that he keeps sealed up, and then once in a while he makes a kosher event. And so this way we can have a caterer, we can have someone prepare us food if we want prepared food, but he's not really a kosher place. He's just kosher sometimes. We have Mashgiach maybe come in and we kasher some stuff, and he has his pots on the side. But the weakness, of course, with that is that with a person who's so busy and so much access to tray food, the possibility of a mistake happening is very much. There's a very strong possibility. He's a guy, he's going to Trader Joe's to buy meat all the time. How do we know for my event he's going to use Empire chickens? Okay, when he has so much access, it makes it the ability to cheat is so much more strong, so obvious. Okay, those are three workarounds. Okay, now I have.
Falling into that category, like you got out of town, sometimes there's a bagel place, and like the bagels are kosher, but nothing else.
I'm coming to that. I'm going to get to that. Okay. So like this idea that I just mentioned about a kosher and a non-kosher caterer, in a larger city, they would never let. It's an automatic zero. No. If you walk in and say, hi, I want to open up a kosher catering company, and you say, and I also have a non-kosher, even have another branch, forget it. It won't go. But in smaller places, they might say, that's realistic. That's all we can pull off. That's all we could do, Okay, and if you walk into Chicago and you call it seriously and say, "Hi, I'm a caterer. I want to open a kosher division to my place," they say, "Forget it. It's hopeless. Don't even walk in the door. They won't talk to them." But with other communities, it happens all the time. Okay, but I'm telling you, the weakness of it is we don't let it because we're just waiting for mistakes to happen. Okay. Now, two other solutions that people have is one is chain stores. Okay, there are a lot of chain stores. Think of Rita's Ices, or there's a chain I haven't seen it here called Nothing Bun Cake. Okay, there are chains where almost all the ingredients come from the main company, and the main company, those ingredients that they're sending to people are kosher, either by mistake, so to speak, or more likely is because in one part of the country they needed that to be kosher, and therefore they said, okay, we'll make our mixes kosher. It was easy for them to do it for whatever reason. They made their things kosher, and all their ingredients that they sent to people are kosher. What it means is if you had a Rita's Ice in your little community with that much going on there, you have a yogurt store that their yogurtini, their mixes are coming and are kosher. It's really easy to make that place certified. So this is not a place that's serving the Jewish community. They're not there. This is not Yoko. They're not out there just to serve the from people. They're really there to serve everybody. But it's sort of almost automatic that they're kosher. So we need some oversight. We have to keep an eye on what's going on. But these communities will create kosher places to eat from places that are, so to speak, they're almost completely kosher without doing anything. Okay, maybe it had to change a little bit. We won't take the lemon flavor. That one kind of cake that they make is not kosher. But by and large, we could get away with it with very little with changes, and they could become all of a sudden a kosher place. Okay, that's one place. One of the ways that some of these communities will find kosher options of people to eat at. Okay, and the other is a little bit different, and that is supermarkets. That is like this. So the simplest part of a kosher aisle in a supermarket is someone walk in and explain to them, there are people here who keep kosher. Will you set up an aisle where you sell Kedem grape juice and Yehuda matzahs and other things like that are, packaged goods that Jewish people want to have. We have a little section in the store called the kosher aisle, and people buy them. Sometimes, depending on how big the community is, it gets expanded. Maybe their bakery will become kosher, because it's sort of like one of those other stores. Maybe it's really easy for the bakery to become kosher. Or maybe they'll make a subsection of the bakery, where I saw this recently. The bakery was not kosher, but there was a little subsection, a little back, they had one oven and one little area where they prepared, and all that stuff, and that extra section was kosher. Okay? So this was in a community that wasn't so big, but for the Jewish community, they had this bakery there. It wasn't so hard to make that section to be a kosher section. Then other places have a kosher fish section. Okay, once a week or every third day, someone comes in and there's a bunch of fish. They cut up those fish. These are the kosher fish, and they mark them as kosher. We have pre-cut fruit. We have pre-packaged meat that comes in. Things that we can do that some of the places even have a kosher butcher. Okay, again, twice a week. They take the meat out of the package, someone comes in to keep an eye on it, they cut it up, they put it packaged up for people, and they put a seal onto it, and now it's kosher meat. So all these are ways of getting kosher food available to people in this place that doesn't really support it, but the supermarket, they work with them to make it kosher. Okay? One of the more interesting ones that I saw recently was a place that had kosher sushi in their non-kosher supermarket. Okay. How did they do that? What they did was, they told them, we need a rice cooker that never goes off. Okay, I told you before about rice cookers. When it finishes, it turns off. Other ones, when they finish, they go to warm. So the thing is, if a yid lights the fire, then it stays Bishul Yisroel as long as the oven, in this case the cooker, stays warm. So this rice cooker never ever goes off. It doesn't even go even when you pull the pot out. Okay, most of them, even when they go to warm, when you pull the pot out of the thing, it turns off. This one, when you pull the pot out, the thing stayed warmer. You pulled it out, you put your hand in, it was still warm inside there. So it was the Bishul. So then, and they locked the plug into the wall. Okay, they built a little cage around it to lock it into the wall, so that you couldn't unplug it, you couldn't turn it on and off. And pulling the pot out of the rice cooker, it stayed hot no matter what. So the Mashgiach turned it on originally. They have an emergency key if they need to pull it out, like some kind of emergency. But the Mashgiach is the only one who can turn the thing on. And it stays 24 hours a day. The thing is always warm. Now, they only cook twice a day. Let's say they make rice. But whatever, it's always Bishul Yisroel. That's the biggest problem for the sushi was Bishul Yisroel. And then ingredient-wise, they make sure that you only use very simple ingredients for the sushi that they make there. Like it was some vegetables that didn't have problems, like cucumber, carrot. They didn't have fish. They only had kani, which was like, it was with a Hashgachah on it. So the set was pretty simple, but all of a sudden this little community had a sushi bar. You could have kosher sushi because the sushi from this place was always kosher. Okay, so they worked within this this is in a supermarket. It was a big supermarket that was not kosher, but they had this kosher. You could buy kosher sushi, and then it was perfectly fine. Okay, so these are all ideas, ways that people made food that was kosher. But all these ideas, this one I mentioned about a supermarket, the one before and about the chain stores, which could be kosher, don't happen by themselves. It happens because the rabbi, or maybe someone else in the community, knocked on their door and said, "Hi guys, we have people here who keep kosher. Can we work with you to somehow make kosher food for these people?" Okay? It didn't happen by itself. It happened because somebody approached these people and said to them, "Guys, we want to make this food. Here's how we could do it. How could we get you some more stuff on the kosher oil? How could we do the kosher fish? Maybe someone could come in twice a week, and we could cut this, we could watch this. Whatever the setup is going to be, someone had to approach them. This didn't happen by itself. This is not like happens when a pizza shop, when Tel Aviv Pizza wanted to become kosher, they said, "Hi, Sishi, we want to become kosher." Here, someone knocked on the door and said to them, "How can we do this? How can we figure out how to make your food kosher?" Okay? And something like that. Okay, so now, I told you some of the issues with making a location. But now, some of the things that I just told you, of these ideas that people have, run into Shabbos issues. Okay? And the most obvious Shabbos issue that there is that how you can keep an eye on things on Shabbos, okay? Which is to say any place that the more involvement that we need from the rabbi is the less likely it is to work on Shabbos. Okay, well, think the most extreme case. We need someone to check vegetables. Okay, there's no one coming to check vegetables on Shabbos. That's not going to work. What happens if we need someone even just to walk in, keep an eye on things? Okay, but the place is a 10-minute drive from the Jewish community, so I can't get there on Shabbos. No one's going to show up there. What's going to happen on a 3-day yontiv? No one's going to be there. So the only way this could work is if it's a place that doesn't need so much oversight. It runs pretty smoothly. Okay, Dunkin' Donuts, the way that the actual store works, there's very little actual cooking going on in the store. It's happening in a commissary. But the actual store itself doesn't need day-to-day someone walking into there. So if somebody doesn't walk in for 2-3 days, nothing's going to happen. Doesn't make a difference. Nobody shows up. Okay, so the first for Shabbos is that we can limit ourselves to places that are relatively simple, don't need so much oversight, and are within reason that someone can actually come. Not that they know that no one shows up over Yom. Okay, the next thing is we have some halachic issues, and that the first is if the store is owned by a Jewish person, then we have a couple of problems. The first is we can't have a Jewish person owning a. We can't give a hashgachah to. We can't condone a Jewish person running a store on Shabbos. So maybe he can make a mechira. He could sell his store for Shabbos. So making mechira has technical issues. You have to work on the details to make sure you get it right, that the mechira actually works. But then you also have a perception issue, and the perception issue is that how does it look in the community when everybody knows that Yankee owns the store and the store's open on Shabbos? It's big enough that Yankee keeps the store open on Shabbos. But there's a big tuda in the front that says that Yankee's store is kosher. What? The rabbi said it's kosher for Yankee to keep his store open on Shabbos? Everybody knows. No, there's a mechira. Okay, the rabbi found the way around. That doesn't. It has a perception issue. So like here in Chicago, we would not give hashgachah to a store owned by a Jewish person that's in the community, and that's within where people will bang into it, walk across it, and see this store, because even if we made mechiras, we worked it out and this and that, because it has a terrible perception. It gives a bad taste to people of the Jewish person owns the store and the rabbi's endorsing that. Okay, but then even if there's no Jewish ownership, there's one more halachic issue, and that is Ma'aser Shabbos, which is like this: if I walk into the store and I say to him, "Can you fry me an egg?" and he fries me an egg on Shabbos, I'm not allowed to eat that egg. Okay, it's not treif because of the Yerdea part of Shulchan Aruch. It's treif because he cooked it for a year on Shabbos. So if he cooks food for a person on Shabbos, the food is not, you can't eat it. Well, you say, come on, David. Who are we kidding? The guy who walked in and ordered an egg on Shabbos, what does he care about that? And the answer is, that's not true. There's lots of people, for better or for worse, they're not Shomer Shabbos, but they keep kosher. They walked into the store because there's a tudah that says the rabbi said that this food is kosher. So they walked in expecting kosher food. And guess what? They got food that they're not allowed to eat. Okay, so should we care about that? Should we care about the person who is not Shomer Shabbos? He went into the food, went in and bought a sandwich on Shabbos, but he wants to keep kosher. So how do we let him do that? How do we let him make food? How do we certify the food as being kosher when the person comes in on Shabbos and he's getting food that he's not allowed to eat? Okay, so in a lot of restaurants, it's not so relevant. Like, again, I'll go back to my Dunkin' Donuts. In Dunkin' Donuts, they don't make anything for you. Okay, I shouldn't say nothing. Almost nothing that they make is for you. Meaning, let's say, take the donuts. They didn't make the donut when you walked in the store. There's a whole shelf with dozens of donuts on it, and you say, I want that one. Okay, so in that case, they made it for the customers, mainly who are not Jewish. And okay, so they didn't do it for a year. The food is going to be mutter. But just something to bear in mind, there are going to be situations that so to speak, the wrong kind of restaurant where they actually cook for you. You walk in and say, hi, I'd like X, and they go ahead and they cook it for you.
Well, the hash browns, don't they put it in the thing and they heat it up for you? Or are you saying that's already cooked?
But that, yeah, so we go detail by detail whether that actually becomes usher. Did he do any cooking or did he just warm it up for you? So the question, we have to go through details, but I'm saying it's something to bear in mind. Again, I'm thinking back to a community, this is from some time ago, where we came, they had a restaurant like this, that they said, we figured out all the kashrus issues, but when you think about it, it's like, but when the guy orders something, they make it for him live. He says, I want an X, and they make it for him. Well, if they make it for him, you're not allowed to eat it. Okay? And again, you're thinking, who cares? I say, no, there are lots of people who keep kosher. There are people who keep kosher, but they would order something on Shabbos. Okay? That's something to bear in mind. Okay. So now on to, I'm winding down. I know, oh my gosh, it's almost 12. I'm sorry. Okay, I got to get through this stuff. You have to bear with me. I should have looked at my watch earlier, and I would have done less of that, because this I know you want to hear about. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, maybe I'll skip the last one. Okay. Partial certification. Okay. A lot of small communities, as you had someone mentioned here beforehand, they want to give partial certification. What does that mean? Is a yogurt store has all their yogurts, I mean the mix that turns into yogurt is all kosher. The toppings, almost the cones are kosher, the toppings are basically kosher. Everything's coming kosher. We live in America. In America, there's kosher every place. Okay? So much stuff is kosher. Everything is coming kosher. But the problem is, they also want to have gummies and marshmallows as their toppings also. Okay? And they're not willing to give that up. You know, there aren't that many Yidden in this little town that to justify the giving up the gummies. We can't. Everybody wants that. So we're stuck with it. So we have to say part of the store is kosher and part is not. In bigger communities, they would never let it go. Never. It would never happen in Chicago. We would never let a store be half kosher and half not kosher. Okay, we're too worried.
It's like the Baskin Robbins. We used to grow up, and you go to any Baskin Robbins, there was a little star. But I remember it was maybe Star K or something. They used to say all these flavors are kosher in every Baskin Robbins except for A and B.
Yeah, so it was a little different. It wasn't a 2 dot saying this store is kosher, but that was it. But it was an in between. It was something like that. But so that's what goes on in a lot of small communities. They say, I told you before, and the way they do it is they'll find a chain store that's basically kosher, and they'll say, let's make it. But we have these 3 things. So now, what do we do now? Okay, so first of all, we have to find a way to separate different scoopers, different separation. But the biggest challenge that they have, I'm sorry, I'm going to go fast. I'm sorry, I've been too long. The biggest challenge that they have is that how do you let people know? Okay, so you say, what do you mean how do we let people know? We'll tell everybody, we'll announce it in shul, we'll put a sign on the door. So what tends to happen is that we get the word out to our main constituency. Everybody in town knows that you can eat everything here except for the stuff on the left side. Everybody knows that. See, it says not kosher. Everybody knows you don't eat stuff on the left side. Otherwise, the store is kosher. But what happens when the person comes from the suburbs who's not part of your community, who happens to chop in? What happens when visitors come from out of town who have no idea? They see a 2 dot, they don't read the little details. It says everything is kosher except for the things in the blue bins. They don't read that. Okay, so it's a challenge for them if we're willing to give hashgacha on partially on the store, is how do we make sure everybody, including not our regulars, our outsiders, that they know what they're like to eat. Okay, and last for now, I'm going to skip the last one. About policies. Okay, I'm skipping that part. Okay, finances. Okay, when this is, I know you don't want to hear about money, but it's very important for this, and that is, again, in a community where the store or the factory comes to the Hashgachah and says, we want to be certified, then the Hashgachah can charge them money. Okay, they can charge them a fair price for what they're doing. They may not get the full amount. Food service Hashgachah costs a lot of money. They may not get the full amount, but they can get a reasonable amount from the person because it says, I want to become kosher. We say, okay, if you want to become kosher, this is how much it costs to do that. Okay, it's not the same as when I knock on your door and I say to you, hi supermarket, would you please make your sushi kosher? You say, yeah, I'm willing to go through some hoops to do that, but how much am I going to pay you? Maybe a token amount. How much will I be willing to pay you? Because I'm doing you a favor. Okay, so you have a problem. Okay, I'll mention because someone asked it. It doesn't make a difference. Even if they pay $1 a year, they need a contract. Okay, even if they pay nothing, they pay $1 for the legality of it because they need a contract in order to protect us. Okay, everything needs to be protected as this is what we expect from you. This is what happens if you break the rules. These are the rules that you have to follow. Everyone needs a contract. It could be 1 page, whatever it is. It's got to be a contract. You talk to other hashgachas, they'll help you with making contracts. But how are we going to pay for all this? Okay, we have to pay for all these things. So some people raise money in the community. Somebody literally they'll get donors. One community has membership. Whoever's in the community pays membership to the VAD to help us pay for these kind of things. Or they have volunteers. And you know who the main volunteer they usually get is? The rabbi. Okay? We need you to do more work. Okay, let's volunteer. But basically, back to what we said, it's his responsibility. He's like, the only way to get kosher is someone's got to drop into the supermarket twice a week. Okay, that's what I'll do. I'll drop into the direct supermarket twice a week. Okay? I'm a volunteer. I'm not being paid for that. Okay? I'm not being paid directly for that. Okay? The problem is, usually, whatever we could scrape together is just to keep us going. But to do bigger stuff, like I told you at the way beginning, we have to write up policies, we have to interact and research and things like that. It's never going to happen with the money. So the good news for that is that the larger hashgachas, the regional hashgachas, are all very happy to share. Okay, they're all in l'shem shemayim. Okay, actually, 90% of the people are in l'shem shemayim. They're happy to help people. If a VAD of no place calls up the CRC or the OU or the Chav K or anybody else and says to them, "Hi, we need help. We need to make up rules of how you check things," they'll be happy to share with them. They're happy to talk to them. Your guy can't check every vegetable. We'll help you along. We'll give you ideas. We'll give you direction and stuff like that. And it's the rabbi's job and the Kashrus people's job to interact with these people. You got to go to a conference. You have to talk to people. You have to, find ways to get together with people in order to learn to get from those people as well. And now one last thing is, some vadim will say I know how we're going to make money. We're going to do industrial hashgacha. If we do industrial hashgacha, the industrial places will pay us money. They pay us money. That'll cover our local vad services, which is true. Tends to be usually in a small vad, gets small industrial clients who don't pay them that much money. And what works better in more cases is they turn to a national hashgacha and say, look, we're located in Timbuktu, okay? If you need work over here, we can do that work for you. You'll tell us what to do. You have the expertise. You tell us, go to this place this often, go here and keep an eye on it, and they'll pay the VAD for that, and that'll help us cover our costs. Okay, I was going to say something about policies, so we're going to pause. I'm sorry, I've been way too long. Okay, anyhow, thank you.